Sun Tzu famously said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." This philosophy is the cornerstone of the fearsome and aged RSI Perseus, a ship so fearsome and dangerous that its mere presence was enough to make the enemy surrender. Deterrence through presence alone. My name is Paul Shelley, and welcome to the AstroHistorian. This is a channel dedicated to exploring and explaining the lore of sci-fi and space universes and discussing their impact. Today we'll be looking at one of the most anticipated ships of StarCitizen, the RSI Perseus gunboat. The Perseus is the oldest of the ships still flying in the StarCitizen universe. Its design was the origin of many, if not all, combat ships that came after it, and its re-emergence almost a century after its retirement proves that its design has remained timeless. To fully understand the ship, we have to first understand the context of its creation. After first contact with the Banu in 2438, the United Nations of Earth realized they had a problem. With how advanced the Banu were, the UNE quickly realized that if they had desired, they could have easily defeated the significantly less advanced humanity. Thus, they started a rearming process to deal with its neglected navy. The UNE Navy was routinely under strength, with the majority of its fleet remaining close to Sol. This did not mesh well with the rapidly expanding humanity, with over a dozen different star systems being actively inhabited and controlled by the UNE. To add to their issues, most of their ships were aging massive capital ships, which were expensive to send out and slow outside of quantum. Thus, it wasn't unheard of for only a single capital ship to be responsible for an entire frontier system. To make matters worse, often these systems were inhabited by a mixture of desperate colonists and the descendants of former anti-unificationist rebels who were always looking to take down a vulnerable symbol of UNE control. Thus, not every conflict could be settled by force. Famously, the hero of first contact with the Banu, General Neil Skokovich, made his name during 2 deployments in the Banshee system, starting in 2415. Not through victories, but through negotiation. The UNE needed to be able to secure their own systems, but didn't have the budget or the structure to be able to build a new fleet. Thus, they reached out to many smaller contractors while sending out new bids to slowly start to modernize their fleet. This process would lead to the creation of many companies well known today, including Hurston Dynamics, Aegis Dynamics, Basilisk, Clark Defense Systems, and Tumbrel Land Systems. However, the UNE realized really quickly that their aging and insufficient government structure was causing major issues to civilian, and especially military, infrastructure. The culmination of reforms inside the UNE was the transition of the government from the United Nations of Earth to the United Planets of Earth in 2523. This reform put the entire military under a single branch with a solitary leader called the High General to smooth out the command structure. On top of that, it brought in the dozen or so systems into the fold as voting members of the government, meaning they were more invested in paying for a military to actually protect them. Thus, by the middle of the 2520s, for the first time since the Unification Wars, the military of humanity was rearming. The most prominent project of this newly reformed military was directly linked to system security, a small, tough, and heavy-hitting patrol gunboat made by Robert Space Industries, known as the Perseus. Built in 2528, the ship was designed to be a powerful and intimidating patrol ship for the expanding United Planets of Earth Navy. Named after the Greek demigod and monster slayer, every Perseus class would be named after mythological or great heroes of humanity's past. She famously was designed to help stop fights before they started, hoping that a combination of design and firepower would discourage most fights. Originally coming in at a length of 100 meters, with a width of 50 meters and a height of 21 meters, it was quite small for a warship, requiring a meager crew of 6 to operate. What it lacked in size, it made up for in firepower and appearance. Designed to be as mean as possible, the designers took inspiration from sharks with sleek lines punctured by sharp points. If the looks didn't scare people, the 2 twin-size 7 operated turrets and 20 size 5 torpedoes would. Unique to this time, this firepower is not truly meant to face down larger opponents, but instead bully smaller ships. In effect, this ship was a direct reaction to the lack of control the Navy had over the systems at the time, and thus it excelled in keeping the peace for the fraction of the cost of a fully crewed capital ship, allowing for dozens of these ships to patrol a system or form a blockade for the same price as a single large capital ship. Now, it's important to note that at the time, sub-capital ships weren't large enough to hold shields. As such, the Perseus was designed with 2 remotely operated turrets to shoot down incoming missiles and heavy armor to withstand barrages of laser and ballistic firepower. This made her slow. Despite her 12 thrusters, she reached a maximum speed of only 92 meters per second. While I won't go into exhaustive details, as I have discussed this extensively in other videos, it seems like a major hurdle for humanity was the 2 issues of power and heat. By the 25th century, we had some basic and primitive shield technology that existed in some form. It's been referenced that shields were used to handle the star flares of Pyro around the same time. It should be noted that these shields could not take extensive flares over a brief period of time, proving that they were indeed very primitive. It is also known that these shields required an enormous amount of power to exist. Put simply, the Perseus was too small to have a power plant large enough to equip this primitive shield tech, and thus relied on its heavy bulk armor to protect it. Thus, it was a small ship and moved more like a larger one, but it wasn't as complex or expensive as the main bulk of the fleet, making it very popular with the UPE at the time. It wasn't long after the first ships were built that the Perseus would prove her worth and make her name as a peacekeeper. Ironically enough, the same changes that led to her creation were the cause of the issues she would be first sent to solve. This new government wasn't just shaking up the military, but the entire former government structure. Now that each branch of the government had its own unified and powerful head, High Advocate for policing and the courts, High Secretary for the legislature, and High General for the military, each new leader set about to reform their branch. High Secretary Livia Fenner attempted to get control of the chaotic economic situation of the planets of humanity. Until then, every system, and sometimes every planet, used their own unique currency. Due to the hands-off approach the UNE had with a lot of colonization efforts, this was never attempted to be rectified. When the UPE introduced its first currency, cash transaction records or CTRs, they found that their own currency was often competing with several other local and nearly as successful currencies. So in 2528, Secretary Fenner assembled a commission of economists, financial consultants, and other officials to explore possible solutions. This commission spent the next few months testing the economic feasibility of a government that supports multiple currencies. They ultimately decided that the entire currency system required a complete overhaul. Local governments would have to be forbidden from minting their own methods of exchange so that the UPE could bring in all the various planets under one consistent and unified form of currency, called the United Earth Credit, or UEC. Unfortunately for the new government, this was not something that everyone in the UPE agreed on. By 2529, the new program to enforce UEC adoption around human space was going poorly. Many feared their planets would be disadvantaged at best, and at worst would cause an economic collapse if they were forced to accept the new currency. As a result, protests, often violent ones, erupted throughout the UPE. None of these were more severe than in Jata on Cestulus in the Dadian system. The system was experiencing a healthy growth from being one of the few places humans and Banu could trade, and it seems many feared that if they were forced to use the new UEC, It might end that relationship with the Banu and spell doom for the system. Intense protests were happening all over the city when one fateful day at the headquarters of the local SSN/CATV Spectrum broadcast company, a panicked security officer began shooting into the protesters. In response, the protests became a riot and began to rip the city apart. Over the course of 2 weeks, hundreds of people were injured and several died. The local government was unable to control the riots, and the UPE was forced to call in the 12th Expeditionary Unit of the UPE Army to put down the riots. Even then, many of these soldiers were injured during the suppression of the riots, and at least 2 were killed. It's likely that these events reverberated throughout the planet. As we know, Jata would remain a hotbed of confrontation well into the Meso era. This would lead to an event known as the Incident at Red Ridge. Violent separatists had held out on Sestulus and faced down local forces. The UPE military was called in to put down this insurrection, and as a result, one of the first ever built Perseuses, the UPES Bunjil, arrived on scene. It was said that the arrival of the ship caused those at Red Ridge to give up peacefully, not wanting to feel the wrath of the modern gunboat that now had its cannons trained on their position. This was the proof of concept that the designers of the ship had hoped for, a ship so intimidating that its presence alone made the opposition sue for peace, but again, at the fraction of the cost of a larger ship. In fact, it became the main point of pride for the Perseus crews. For instance, the crew of the UPES Arash, nicknamed the Soothsayers, wore badges with a hooded faceless wraith clutching a crystal ball and the slogan, "Never a shot fired, never a battle lost." While records indicate their slogan was not exactly truthful, it did reflect the ship's unique ability to stop conflicts by its presence alone. It was likely around this time that RSI began to use the Perseus as the base design for its updated and modern fleet of larger warships. It was clear by the 2930s that presentation was as important as defense when it came to securing and expanding the human systems. This wedge design had been incorporated into many larger military ships in RSI's roster since the original Perseus's release. The most obvious example is that of the Polaris Corvette, but even the mighty Bengal carrier and the nimble Scorpius heavy fighter have some similar design characteristics. Given what we know, it's likely that many designs from years after its creation used the Perseus as a starting point until the ship design moved into new directions starting in the 27th century. In 2530, Gaia Planet Services attempted to terraform a planet without authorization. While setting up their equipment, they were captured by a strange alien race. This new species released one of the crew, a foreman named Charles Baxter, as a gesture of good faith to return to the UPE. The UPE immediately sent in a fleet, likely vanguarded by Perseuses, to the system. There they set up a perimeter around the jump point, hoping to discourage these strange new aliens from trying anything violent. They began negotiating with a race that we now know as the Xi'an. This was the beginning of the Human-Xi'an Cold War, a conflict which would become the main theater for the ship. In the aftermath of the negotiated settlement, humanity was shown that not only were they still woefully unprepared for violence against a technologically advanced species like the Banu and Xi'an, but were so weak diplomatically that the entire species was put under threat, as the UPE was forced to give these new aliens the location of every jump point they had in order to secure the hostages' release. Thus, with every connection to Xi'an space becoming an invasion corridor, the UPE had no choice but to create a new defensive line to try and show strength, as well as tactically slow down any potential invasion. Devised under Navy General Armistead Perry, what eventually became known as the Perry Line was created, a no-fly zone which restricted trade and industrial access to systems that bordered Xi'an space. While fallback systems like Hadrian, Kiel, and Castra quickly became fortified, there needed to be ships to patrol the no man's land of the Perry Line itself. Thus, it fell upon the best ship the UPE had at the time for such a role, the Perseus. Being cheap, easy to operate, and having significant firepower for its size, the Perseus became the backbone of patrols along the line. While the ship was being tasked with checking potential Xi'an aggression, another incident on the other side of UPE space would test the ship for the first time in combat. In 2541, a disillusioned scientist in the Centauri system, Dr. Keller Lensch, quit his job and started using what little funds and technology he had to explore. By sheer luck or providence, he discovered a previously undiscovered jump point, which led him to the homeworld of a technologically advanced spacefaring species, which we know now as the Tevarin. In the aftermath of First Contact, the Tevarin declared war on humanity. Driven by a martial culture and a desperate need to expand in order to deal with a growing overpopulation issue, the Tevarin struck into the unprepared UPE, conquering the Idris system by 2542. These early engagements were often between small Perseuses and the technologically more advanced Tevarin. This is likely because the mainline human fleet was still anchored around Sol, and was often too slow to be a reactive force as humanity needed it to be. While the ship stood out, it was no match for the miniaturized shield tech of the faster Tevarin ships. While records are sparse, we can imagine that the Perseus struggled alongside other mainline ships of the UPE, which were never designed to fight this kind of war. Technologically disadvantaged, the Perseus had one thing that the Tevarin didn't have: raw numbers. It is likely that the simplicity and small crew size that made it a great patrol gunboat made it easy to churn out in droves. By the end of the war, there were likely so many Perseuses that they routinely were found everywhere in the UPE. In fact, we know they became so common that they became the poster child of the Peri line itself, with several Perseus-class vessels always patrolling the border at any given time. When the war ended, humanity paradoxically entered a small golden age of technology just before sliding into a tyrannical dictatorship under the Mezzers. With the defeat of the Tevarin, humanity was able to recover the secrets of their tech, and was building brand new ships to utilize this tech even before the war came to a close, with the Retaliator bomber likely being the first human-designed ship of its size to be built around Tevarin-style shield technology. This meant more and more smaller ships could utilize shield technology, which included the Perseus. However, at the same time, the hero of the war, Ivar Mezzer, was campaigning to turn the UPE into an imperial state, with a powerful central leader called the Prime Citizen, later the Imperator. This was pushed as a means to secure humanity's future against the hostile actions of our many Xeno neighbors. Having unitary authority meant there was less red tape for the military to design, build, and issue new, more powerful weapons and ships. By the time Mezzer ascended to the throne, the new United Empire of Earth was well on its way to build the replacement for the Perseus, the larger and more powerful Aegis Idris frigate. However, the Perseus remained the main frontline defense of the Peri line, simply because it was so ubiquitous and did its job very well. This takes us to, possibly, the most famous incident that likely involved the Perseus on the Peri line itself, which is known as the standoff in Hador in 2550. This was the closest the two species ever came to total war. On November 7th, 2550, a massive explosion ripped through the Hador system. The detonation was so big it lit up every sensor in the system. This caused a UE Navy patrol of fighters and patrol craft, likely heavy fighters and RSI Perseus gunboats, to investigate the cause. When the patrol arrived, they found Xi'an ships, likely fighters or small patrol craft, scanning the debris field of what was once the experimental long-range scanner array TKL-2900. Not knowing if the Xi'an were responsible for the explosion, the patrol did not attack, but demanded the Xi'an retreat from the area. While the Xi'an did not open fire in response, all hails were ignored, and they continued to scan. Finally, the leader of the patrol, likely commander of a Perseus, Lieutenant Commander Polina Balmont, brought her guns online and fired the size 7s across the bow of one of the Xi'an ships as a warning shot. The Xi'an instantly withdrew as Balmont and her ships set up a perimeter to block the Xi'an's return and wait for further patrols to arrive. Lieutenant Commander Balmont then took her ship and jumped back to the Baker system to inform Admiral Hirsch, the leader of the local UE Navy battle group, that TKL-2900 had exploded and Xi'an ships were spotted at the scene. The standoff escalated over the course of the day as both sides launched their fleets into the system, only to eventually cool off thanks to the clever intuition of Admiral Hirsch and the Xi'an battle leader. Once again, both sides backed down, with the Perseus's menacing presence working its magic once more. However, as time went on, the ship slowly fell out of favor. Despite upgrades to the ship to include miniaturized shield technology devised from captured Devaran examples, the larger, more versatile Aegis Dynamic Idris began to replace much of the ship's role as a patrol ship to keep the peace. And by 2860, the ship was entirely phased out of production by RSI, with only a handful of aging models still in service with the Navy. That was until the Vanduul attack on Vega 2 changed everything. On October 5th, 2945, a massive Vanduul clan headed by a kingship entered the Vega system. The only thing standing between it and Vega 2, its intended target, was a battle group of the Second Fleet led by the legendary Admiral Ernst Bishop. Though the battle was fierce, with many elements of the Vanduul making landfall and destroying the city of New Corvo, quick actions by Squadron 42 and the remaining crew of the fatally damaged UES Gauntlet led to the destruction of the kingship and the scattering of the remaining Vanduul fleet. Within days of the attack on Vega, Admiral Bishop returned to Earth to speak before the Senate and call for a declaration of war on the Vanduul, to be able to mobilize any and all assets to the defense of the Empire against the imminent threat. A call that was answered by the Senate. This meant that all available ships were mustered towards the Vanduul front, including several aging RSI Perseus. In March of 2946, intelligence reports indicated that the Oberon system was under threat, as a massive Vanduul clan was planning on invading the system. Admiral Bishop ordered the 65th Battle Group of the Second Fleet into the system, including the UEE's new kingship killer, the UES Retribution, and the few remaining Venerable Perseus gunboats. During the ensuing battle, a part of the UE lines were held by the few aging RSI Perseuses that had been brought along, including one UES Achilles. Sometime during that battle, the Vanduul maneuvered several destroyers to that location, seeing it as a weak spot in the line. Knowing the line had to hold, the Achilles threw herself into the teeth of the oncoming Vanduul fleet to try to buy some time. Much to the surprise of the Vanduul, the Achilles' sturdy construction, having several times the usual armor allotted for ships of her size, soaked up their plasma attacks, while her rapid-fire automated defense turrets swatted any incoming missiles and torpedoes. Even ramming attacks didn't work, as the ship's design and mass proved too hard to deliver a killing blow. Thus, the Achilles remained in the fight long enough to take down two Vanduul destroyers, ships 4 times its size, before itself being disabled. The Achilles' final stand kept the line intact and helped turn the tide of the battle to give victory to the UEE at Oberon. Admiral Bishop was so impressed with the performance of the Perseus that he personally requested RSI update and resume construction of the ship. This resulted in Project Perseus, a modernized gunboat for both military and civilian use. I say civilian because after the passage of the Militia Mobilization Act, in the aftermath of the attack on Vega, the new Perseus was as easy to sell to civilians as it was the military. Thus, this brand new rework of the classic design would take things that made it so effective against the Vanduul and update it. The first thing that RSI did was increase the length, slightly, while giving it a similar interior to their concurrent Polaris corvette. In addition to the length, the ship got upgunned. It gained an additional remote turret on the front, while its main armaments went from size 7s to size 8s, known as Medusas, making the subcap Slayer into a near peer with corvettes and frigates. To make the guns hit even harder, they took inspiration from the modern Javelin destroyers and gave each main battery 2 additional smaller hardpoints to allow the gunner to engage fighters as effectively as larger ships. It also gained a number of point defense systems to update it to modern standards. Built with long-range patrols in mind, it also got an updated cargo hold, large enough to hold an RSI Ursa rover for ground operations, allowing the ship to act as a deterrent in land, air, and space. Its modern design is clearly built around the synergy with both Polaris corvettes and its fellow gunship, the Aegis Dynamics Hammerhead. With crew being a major issue, the UEE has been keen on fielding many smaller ships to help keep the peace and patrol the borders, compared to a single larger ship like the Idris, which requires more crew, thus cutting back the cost while not losing power projection. It remains to be seen if this mythic ship slayer of the 26th century can keep its storied reputation in the 30th. However, given its past, it would be unwise to test the terrifying looks and abilities of this storied monster hunter. For it truly embodies the ancient saying, "If you wish for peace, prepare for war." I'd like to thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, think about liking the video, subscribing for more content, and hitting the bell icon to be notified when these release. These take a long time to research and edit, so hitting that like button goes a long way to promoting it to other like-minded lovers of StarCitizen and lore in general. The Perseus is one of my favorite ships that has some of my favorite lore behind it. The Last Stand of the Achilles reminds me a lot of the events of Taffy 3 from World War II, and as regular viewers of the channel know, I'm a sucker for an underdog story. I do wish we had more stories and confirmation behind its presence in the backstory of the game though. Its reputation as the ship who never ducks a fade and whose hands are rated E for everyone, you'd assume it's gotten a few more scraps than a handful of Xi'an and Vandul over the centuries of use. I also want to repeat my supposition that the old Perseus stats are likely still canon, while the new ship design we are getting in the game is simply based on the old design that has been updated to the new ideas, like mounted auxiliary turrets of the main guns similar to the Jav. It makes the most sense logically, as the modern Perseus is the first updated version of the ship in like a century. It would make sense if the ship got longer and added more guns, while retaining the same things that made the Achilles so effective, its armored, slow patrol ship design. I'd also like to thank those on screen now for supporting the channel financially. If you want to throw in a few credits, think about becoming a member on YouTube. And if you want a bit more for your contribution, join the Patreon. Patreons get early, ad-free access to all videos, including exclusive early access to my long-running Complete History of StarCitizen lore series. Check those out now in the top right if you want to know what you're getting. Thanks again for watching, and remember, ex Historia ad Astra.